The Nakajima Kika was Japan's first jet aircraft, and it's available in War Thunder. Let's take a look. The Kika was the result of an on-again, off-again, on-again project by Japan to produce not only their first jet engines, but their first jet-powered aircraft. After exchanging information with their German allies back in 1942, the Japanese set about designing an aircraft that ended up having a bit of an outward similarity to the German Me-262, and it might be easy to assume it was a copy, but in fact, the basic design principles of a long fuselage with low-mounted wings and twin engine pods was fairly common among early jet aircraft projects, and the general layout of the Kika was likely influenced by what the Japanese had learned about the Me-262 project, but it was far from a copy. The Kika was smaller, lighter, had much less firepower, had an entirely different wing design, and its internal structure was totally different. This was its own aircraft. Now, Japan's jet engine program originally produced a small motor jet engine for it called the Su-11, but those engines ended up not producing anywhere near the intended power, which delayed the Kika project quite a bit. After a new axial flow turbojet was produced, which was based loosely on information, again, obtained from Germany, the Kika project was restarted and the work began to put the finishing touches on the new aircraft. The first prototype of the Kika flew only once, 8 days before the end of the war, and it ended up being damaged in an aborted takeoff on its second flight, and the entire project was halted before repairs were finished, or before the second prototype was ready. In total, about 20 or so airframes were in various stages of construction when the work stopped. The NE-20 jet engine was generally the weakest of the first generation of axial flow turbojets, but importantly, it worked, and it proved that the Japanese aviation industry was capable of producing modern turbojets. Like the Kika, work on the engines was stopped when the war ended. What we get in War Thunder is simply called the Kika, a jet fighter in rank 5 at battle rating 7.0. When this plane was first introduced to the game, they had called it the Kitsuka, but later changed it back to the Kika after a lot of players complained about the translation. The aircraft is very much a first-generation jet, and it doesn't have any radar or anything like that. And in fact, when you unlock it, the plane only has one 30mm cannon. Once you unlock the Otsu mod, you get a second 30mm Type 5 cannon mounted in the nose. Now, these cannons aren't great. They have a very low cyclic rate, which can make them pretty difficult to aim, and the ammo belts you get for it are pretty limited. The full tracer belt generally ends up being the best option for attacking aircraft, since it has explosive ammo and every shot is going to have the same ballistics. A huge limiting factor is that the Kika only gets 50 rounds of ammo per gun, which can seriously limit your overall kill counts, even if you rely on careful sniping and conserving your ammo. For external weapons, the Kika can carry a bomb. It can take either a 500 or an 800 kilogram bomb, which isn't exactly a heavy load of weapons, but it gives the plane a bit more utility than if its only weapons were 100 rounds of ammo from hard-to-shoot cannons. There isn't any ballistics computer or anything like that, so just like most of the other early jets, you're just blind bombing. The flight performance of the Kika is about what you'd expect from a first-generation World War II jet fighter. The acceleration is slow, but its top-end speed is decent compared to props, if you can get up to altitude, and if you have a few minutes to just fly in a straight line. It retains energy decently enough in horizontal maneuvers, but its performance in a vertical climb depends heavily on your angle of attack. It rolls well in most situations, which can help and dive attacks, adjusting for aim as your target maneuvers down below you, but its overall maneuverability is barely average, and you're going to be outturned in dogfights by most opponents, unless your air combat maneuvering is just absolutely flawless. A critically important detail is that its acceleration is bad, which I mentioned, but it's actually worse than a lot of prop fighters it ends up flying up against. So, out in matches, it can seem like prop aircraft are outrunning you, or running you down, even if you think you've already gotten up to speed, since it just takes so long for the Kika to make up that last difference to get up to its maximum. The plane has combat flaps, and can safely use them a bit over 500 kilometers an hour, but just be mindful of the additional energy bleed when they're deployed. Also, the Kika can overdrive its engines to 106%, but they'll overheat very quickly if you keep them spun up like that for more than about 30 seconds at a time. Another important detail, the Kika gets Rato pods whenever it does a runway takeoff. However, the pods block the landing gear from retracting, so unfortunately you do actually have to use them on takeoff, and you can't take them with you for a quick speed boost like some other planes can. Ah well. Flying the Kika into air battles can be a bit difficult. The first thing to say is that the stock grind is absolutely awful, with just one cannon and 50 rounds of ammo. Just awful. Once you get the second cannon equipped, it gets a bit easier, but it's still quite difficult to be effective in air combat due to the limited ammo and the low cyclic rate of the guns. I tended to have the most success using the tracer belt and firing very short, carefully aimed bursts. You can see it in the clips here, where I was generally far more effective shooting at anything smaller than a bomber by taking quick, snipe shots rather than firing more traditional 1 or 2 second bursts. One of the big things I find with the Kika in air battles is that my kills get stolen. Like, a lot. Now, I don't mean intentional kill steals where someone comes in to be a jerk. I mean that since I have to line up very carefully aimed shots, it leaves plenty of time while I'm chasing someone for somebody else with more ammo or better guns to just fly by and fire hose my target half a second before I'm zeroed in. If you find something like that happening to you in the Kika, it's not just you, and your teammates probably aren't trying to, grief you or anything. Also, the Kika doesn't take battle damage very well, so even a few unlucky hits from low-caliber machine guns can be enough to send you down. If you fly out with the bomb, you get the opportunity to dump it on a base or some ground targets before going into air combat, but just keep in mind that the flight performance of the Kika is already kinda marginal, and with a huge bomb weighing the plane down, it gets even worse. So be careful. Now, speaking of huge chunky bombs, something the Kika can actually do okay at is close air support. If you keep its speed up, it's not super difficult to evade interception, and fire from the ground will be almost a non-factor at this battle rating. The larger bomb it gets has a huge blast radius, so if you practice aiming with it, it won't be too difficult to knock out targets. The catch is that it only gets one bomb, so you have to go land after every drop. Visually, the Kika looks a bit like a few of the other early jets, with, the slender fuselage, the low-mounted wings, and the engine pods about a third of the way out. I think it's an okay-looking plane, but you don't get any interesting paint jobs or anything like that for it. Landing the Kika is easy, but you don't get a drag chute or anything, and its brakes aren't terribly effective, so you end up needing a pretty long landing run. Make sure to touch down near the end of the runway if possible. The cockpit is another mixed bag. The all-around visibility is just outstanding. Even the view directly backwards is basically unobstructed with no pilot seat in the way. But all you get to aim with is a simple post-rod gun sight right out of World War I. I didn't even get one hit on a target flying this out in VR. To close out on the Nakajima Kika, this plane gets radar pods, and it has good cockpit visibility in all directions. However, its flight performance is barely average, it's seriously underarmed, and it's very difficult to use it effectively in air battles. The final verdict on the Kika is that this plane just isn't competitive against basically any other jet aircraft, and even some props can dance all over its grave. The jet is more interesting for its historical context than for its overall place in War Thunder. If this is your first jet fighter, please believe me that things get a lot better just one level further into the tech tree. As always, thanks for watching.